The fluorescent lights buzzed above as I stood frozen in the conference room, every pair of eyes fixed on me. Richard Hale leaned back in his leather chair, fingers laced behind his head, smirking like he'd just won a game I didn't know we were playing. "You're fired, Addison," he said casually. "You've become difficult to work with." My stomach dropped. The room tilted. I'd built this marketing department from nothing, hired half these people, trained them myself. And now, in front of my entire team, he was reducing me to a problem employee. "Without this job, you'll be a nobody," Richard continued, his voice sharp and deliberate. "No connections, no reputation, nothing." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face burning, my hands trembled, but I refused to cry, not here, not in front of him. Instead, I gathered the files in front of me, stood up slowly, and looked him dead in the eye. "We'll see about that," I whispered. Then I walked out, my heels clicking against the polished floor, each step echoing in the deadly silent room. The next morning, my badge didn't work. I swiped it 3 times at the glass doors before security approached. "Sorry, Miss Clark," the guard said awkwardly. "Your access has been revoked." HR escorted me to my desk like I was a criminal. My coworkers suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Even Torai, my assistant who I'd mentored for 2 years, couldn't look at me. I packed my belongings into a cardboard box. 5 years of work, reduced to office supplies and a wilted desk plant. The walk to my car felt endless. Every step burned with humiliation. I sat behind the wheel as rain began to fall, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The tears came then, hot and angry. I'd given everything to Hale Dynamics. My nights, my weekends, my relationships, and Richard had erased me in 5 minutes. I drove home in a daze, replaying every moment, every word, trying to understand what I'd done wrong. But deep down, I already knew the truth. That night, I sat in my dark apartment, staring at the wall. Richard's words echoed endlessly. "You'll be nobody without this job." The statement felt like a curse, designed to haunt me forever. But as I sat there in the darkness, something shifted inside me. A small spark of anger cut through the grief. He didn't fire me because I failed. He fired me because I was becoming better than him, because my campaigns were bringing in more clients than his ever had. Because the board had started asking for me specifically in meetings. Because I threatened the fragile empire he'd built on other people's work. My name is Addison Clark. I was the former marketing director of Hale Dynamics. And this is the story of how the man who destroyed my career ended up on his knees, begging me for a partnership. But first, let me take you back to where it all began, so you understand exactly what I lost and exactly what I built from the ashes. 2 years before my firing, I was Richard's golden employee. I arrived at 7 every morning and left after 9 most nights. I built marketing campaigns that doubled Hale Dynamics' client base in 18 months. Richard called me the backbone of this company in front of investors. He praised my work ethic, my creativity, and my dedication. I believed him. I believed that loyalty and hard work would be rewarded. I believed I was building a future not just for the company but for myself. Every success felt like a step towards something bigger. A promotion, partnership, maybe even my own division someday. Richard encouraged these dreams. "You're going places, Addison," he'd say with that charming smile. "Stick with me and you'll be unstoppable." So I stuck with him. I trusted him. I gave him everything I had, never questioning, never doubting. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. I mistook manipulation for mentorship. I confused exploitation for opportunity. And I never saw the betrayal coming until it was far too late. The signs were there, though. I just refused to see them. It started small. Richard would take credit for my presentations, presenting my ideas to clients as if they'd sprung from his brilliant mind. In meetings, he'd cut me off mid-sentence, finishing my thoughts and reframing them as his own insights. Strategy calls that I should have been part of suddenly happened without me. "We already discussed it," he'd say dismissively when I asked why I wasn't included. Then there was Torai. My assistant started getting mysterious bonuses I wasn't told about. She'd leave the office early for special projects that were never explained. When I asked Richard about it, he smiled that slick smile. "Just rewarding initiative," he said. "You should be happy for her." But my gut screamed that something was wrong. The budget for my department started disappearing into undefined expenses. Client emails went unanswered. Projects I'd carefully planned were suddenly reassigned without explanation. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself everything was fine. I was wrong. The truth exploded at the annual company dinner 3 months before I was fired. I arrived late after finishing a client proposal. The restaurant buzzed with conversation and laughter. I spotted Richard at the bar, his arm around Torai's waist. They were laughing together, heads close, intimate. My colleague Marcus appeared beside me. "You didn't know?" he asked quietly. I felt sick. "Know what?" Marcus hesitated, then sighed. "Richard and Torai have been together for months. Everyone knows. He's been grooming her to take your position." The words hit me like ice water. Suddenly everything made sense. The missing budget had funded her promotions. The after-hours meetings weren't about work. The projects being reassigned were going to her. I'd been systematically replaced while training my own replacement. That night, I barely made it to my car before throwing up in the parking lot. I'd trusted them both, mentored Torai, believed in Richard. And they'd been plotting my removal for months, right under my nose. I confronted Richard the next morning. I walked into his office without knocking, my hands shaking but my voice steady. "You've been using me to build your reputation while planning to replace me," I said. Richard didn't even pretend to be surprised. He leaned back in his chair, that infuriating smirk spreading across his face. "It's not personal, Addison, it's business." "Business," I repeated, my voice rising. "I built this department. I brought in millions in revenue. I made you look good." He stood up, straightening his expensive tie. "And I'm grateful, but you've become difficult. You question my decisions. You want more credit than you deserve. Torai is younger, more flexible, more willing to follow directions." He walked around his desk, standing too close. "You should learn your place, Addison. This is my company. You work for me. Not the other way around." That's when I realized the horrible truth. He didn't just underestimate me. He enjoyed watching me fall. He wanted me broken, humiliated, erased. And he genuinely believed I couldn't survive without him. The weeks after that confrontation were torture. Richard made my life miserable. He gave my biggest projects to Torai. He excluded me from important meetings. He criticized my work in front of the team, nitpicking details that had never mattered before. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and quieter with each passing day. My confidence crumbled. I started doubting every decision, second-guessing every email. At home, I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake replaying conversations, wondering what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed. My friends told me to quit. "Just leave," they said. "Find something better." But I couldn't. Some stubborn part of me refused to give him the satisfaction. I wanted to prove I belonged there. I wanted him to see my value. I wanted recognition, respect, and acknowledgement. I wanted everything he'd promised and then stolen away. So I stayed. I worked harder. I tried to be perfect. And then, on that horrible day in the conference room, he fired me anyway. All my effort, all my loyalty, meant absolutely nothing. For 2 weeks after my firing, I barely left my apartment. I ordered food delivery and watched mindless television, trying to silence the voice in my head repeating Richard's words over and over. "You'll be nobody without this job." My phone stayed silent. Not one coworker called. Not even Marcus, who'd seemed sympathetic at the dinner. They'd all moved on, probably relieved it wasn't them. I finally forced myself to update my resume. But staring at it, I realized how completely Richard had dominated my professional identity. Every achievement was tied to Hale Dynamics. Every success lived under his company's brand. On paper, I looked like just another employee, easily replaceable. The thought made me sick. Then, scrolling through LinkedIn one sleepless night, I saw something that changed everything. A post from David Chen, one of my former clients. He'd left Hale Dynamics, citing complete disorganization and lack of professionalism. My heart raced. David had been one of my biggest accounts. I'd personally managed his campaigns for 3 years. We'd built a relationship based on trust and results. Without overthinking it, I sent him a private message. "David, if you ever need branding help, I'm available for consulting." He replied within 10 minutes. "Addison, I've been hoping you'd reach out. Are you free tomorrow?" We met at a small coffee shop downtown. I wore my best suit, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. My hands shook as I opened my laptop. David smiled warmly. "I heard what happened. Richard's an idiot for letting you go." Those words meant more than he could know. We talked for 2 hours. He wanted a complete rebrand for his expanding business. I quoted him a price, my heart pounding, terrified he'd laugh and walk away. Instead, he nodded immediately. "That's fair. When can you start?" I started that afternoon, working from my tiny apartment with a desperate intensity. This wasn't just a project. It was proof that I existed beyond Richard Hale, that my skills had value, that I wasn't nobody. 2 weeks later, David sent the final payment. I stared at the notification on my phone until tears blurred the screen. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was mine. I'd earned it without Richard's name, without Hale Dynamics, without anyone's permission. I'd made my first dollar as Addison Clark, not as someone's disposable employee. I turned my living room into an office. My friends thought I'd lost my mind. "You need stability," they said. "Apply for real jobs." But something had awakened inside me. For years, I'd built Richard's dream. Now I want to build my own. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, learning everything I'd never been allowed to do at Hale Dynamics. I studied new marketing strategies, explored emerging platforms, experimented with techniques Richard had always dismissed as too risky. For the first time in my career, I wasn't afraid to make mistakes. There was no boss to impress, no performance review to worry about, no political games to navigate. Just me, my skills, and the freedom to try. I registered my business officially. Clark & Co. Marketing Solutions. The name felt powerful. I designed a simple logo and built a basic website. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every small step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Richard had tried to erase. I wasn't building a company to spite him. I was building it to prove to myself that I'd always been enough. David recommended me to a startup founder he knew. That founder hired me, then told 2 other entrepreneurs about my work. Within 6 weeks, I had 5 active clients. My phone buzzed constantly with inquiries. Each new project felt like a small victory, proof that I didn't need Hale Dynamics. I just needed to believe in myself. The work was exhausting. I handled everything alone. Client meetings, strategy development, content creation, invoicing, customer service. Some nights I collapsed into bed fully clothed, too tired to change. But I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way I'd never been at Hale Dynamics. There was no Richard taking credit for my work, no office politics, no feeling invisible despite working harder than everyone else. Every success was mine. Every failure was mine to learn from. I was building something real, something sustainable, something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's ego or insecurity. My bank account grew slowly but steadily. I wasn't getting rich, but I was surviving. More importantly, I was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with money. I was becoming the person I'd always wanted to be. Then, 3 months after my firing, I started hearing whispers. Hale Dynamics was struggling. Clients were leaving. Their flagship project, the one I'd conceptualized and built from scratch, had completely collapsed under Torai's management. Revenue was down 40%. Richard was blaming difficult market conditions and unexpected client changes. But people who still worked there told a different story. Torai had no idea what she was doing. She'd relied entirely on following my established systems. When those needed updating or when new challenges emerged, she panicked. Projects failed. Deadlines were missed. Client relationships deteriorated. Richard had tried to step in, but marketing had never been his strength. He was a salesman, good at making promises. I'd been the one delivering on them. Without me, the whole department was falling apart. I wish I could say I felt nothing hearing this news, but I'd be lying. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt sad. I'd poured my heart into that department. Watching it crumble hurt, even though I was no longer part of it. But mostly, I felt relieved that I'd escaped before the whole thing collapsed. One evening, I received a message I never expected. "Addison, it's Torai, can we talk?" I stared at the text for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it immediately. She betrayed me, took my job, and participated in my humiliation. But curiosity won. "What do you want?" I replied. "I made a terrible mistake. Richard is treating me exactly how he treated you. Worse, actually. Please, I need to talk." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. Torai showed up at my apartment looking completely different from the confident assistant I'd known. She was pale, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. "I quit yesterday," she said immediately. "I should have never believed him. He promised me everything, then threw me under the bus when the second thing went wrong." She told me everything. How Richard had manipulated her, made her feel special, convinced her she deserved my position. How he turned on her the moment clients started leaving. How he blamed her for problems he'd created, humiliated her in meetings, and threatened to fire her daily. "I'm so sorry, Addison," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You tried to help me and I betrayed you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know the truth." I didn't forgive Torre immediately. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair overnight. But I listened. And slowly I began to understand. She'd been young, ambitious, and manipulated by someone who knew exactly how to exploit those qualities. Richard had used her just like he'd used me. After she left, I sat alone, thinking. Torre knew Hale's internal systems inside and out. She understood their clients' pain points, their frustrations, their needs. She had information that could be valuable. A week later, I called her. "If you're serious about making things right, I have a proposal." We met again, and I laid out my vision. Clark & Co. was growing, but I needed help. I needed someone who understood the industry, who knew what not to do, who wanted redemption as badly as I wanted success. "I'll pay you fairly," I said. "But this is my company, my vision. If you're looking for another Richard to follow blindly, this isn't the place." Torre nodded, her eyes serious. "I don't want to follow. I want to build something real, something honest, with you." She started the next week. Together, we crafted strategies specifically designed for former Hale Dynamics clients, addressing exactly what had gone wrong after I left. The results were immediate. Clients started leaving Hale Dynamics and coming to us. Not because we poached them, but because we offered what Richard never could: genuine expertise, honest communication, and strategies that actually worked. Within 3 months, Clark & Co. had grown from just me to 5 full-time employees. We moved from my apartment to a small downtown office. The day the sign went up, "Clark & Co. Marketing Solutions," I stood on the sidewalk and cried. Not sad tears. Happy ones. 6 months ago, Richard had told me I'd be nobody without him. Now I had my own company, my own team, my own reputation built on my actual work. I took a photo of that sign and saved it to my phone. On hard days, when doubt crept in, I'd look at it and remember what I'd overcome. I'd proven Richard wrong in the most definitive way possible. I didn't just survive without him. I thrived. And the best part, I'd done it with integrity. I hadn't sabotaged him or spread lies. I'd simply done excellent work, treated people with respect, and let my results speak for themselves. Then, exactly 6 months after Richard fired me, Torre walked into my office holding her laptop. Her expression was strange, somewhere between shock and amusement. "You need to see this," she said, turning the screen toward me. My heart stopped. There, in my email inbox, was a message from Richard Hale. Subject line, "Partnership opportunity." I read it 3 times, my hands shaking. Richard wanted to meet. He wanted to discuss mutually beneficial collaboration. He'd heard about Clark & Co.'s success and thought we could combine forces for greater impact. The email was formal, professional, stripped of the condescension that had colored every interaction we'd had before. Torre watched my face. "What are you going to do?" I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to delete the email and never think about Richard Hale again. But another part, the part that had survived his betrayal and built something from nothing, wanted closure. I wanted to look him in the eye and show him exactly who I'd become. "Set up a meeting," I said finally. "Let's hear what he has to say." We met at a neutral location, an upscale restaurant downtown. I arrived early, wearing my best suit, my confidence solid but my stomach churning. Richard walked in looking older somehow. His perfect hair showed gray at the temples. His expensive suit hung slightly loose like he'd lost weight. He sat down across from me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "Addison," he finally said, his voice quieter than I remembered. "Thank you for meeting me." I sipped my water, saying nothing. He cleared his throat. "Hale Dynamics is struggling. I won't pretend otherwise. We've lost significant clients and revenue. The department you built has never recovered since you left." "Since you fired me," I corrected calmly. He flinched. "Yes, since I fired you. That was a mistake." The admission hung between us. 6 months ago, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now they felt empty. "I have a proposal," Richard continued, sliding a folder across the table. "A merger. Your creativity and expertise, my resources and connections. We could rebuild together, 50-50 partnership." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "You once told me I'd be nobody without you," I said softly. "Remind me, Richard, how's that working out?" Richard's face reddened. I was angry. I didn't mean it. "Yes, you did," I replied. "You meant every word. You believed I was nothing without your company, your name, your approval." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I leaned forward. "You didn't just fire me, Richard. You humiliated me. You stole credit for my work for years. You manipulated my assistant into betraying me. You tried to erase me from an industry I helped build." "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry." Are you? I asked. Or are you just desperate? The words hung between us. Richard pushed the folder closer. The offer stands 50-50, equal partners. I'm not asking you to work for me. I'm asking you to work with me. I picked up the folder, flipping through the pages. The proposal was detailed, professional, and surprisingly generous. On paper, it made sense. His established name and resources combined with my proven recent success could create something powerful. For a brief moment, I actually considered it. Not because I needed him, but because the opportunity was genuinely interesting. Then I remembered that day in the conference room. The humiliation, the fear, the feeling of being erased. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. No, I said simply. Richard blinked. Addison, this is a good offer. You can't possibly. I can, I interrupted, and I am. You can't survive in this market alone, he insisted, his desperation showing. You'll plateau, you'll need the resources I have, connections, experience. I smiled, and it was genuine. Richard, 6 months ago you told me I was nobody without your job. You were wrong. I'm not nobody. I'm Addison Clark. I built your department from scratch, and I built my own company the same way. I don't need your resources. I don't need your connections. I don't need you. He stared at me, his face cycling through emotions, shock, anger, disbelief. This is about revenge, he finally said. You want to watch me fail. I shook my head. This isn't about you at all. It's about me. For the first time in my career, I'm building something that's completely mine. Why would I give that up to tie myself to someone who's already proven they'll throw me away the moment I'm inconvenienced? I stood up, gathering my things. I hope you figure things out, Richard. I really do. But I'm not your solution. You need to save yourself. I walked out of that restaurant feeling lighter than I had in years. A week later, something unexpected happened. David Chen, my first independent client, forwarded me an email accidentally. It was from Richard, sent to several of my current clients. In it, Richard blamed me for Hale Dynamics' downfall. He claimed I'd sabotaged projects before leaving, that I'd stolen client information, that I was unethical and unprofessional. The lies were so blatant, so desperate that I almost laughed. My lawyer advised silence. Don't engage, she said. He's desperate and flailing. Let it go. But I couldn't. Not because I wanted revenge, but because lies like that could damage everything I'd built. Instead of getting angry, I got strategic. I sent a polite, professional email to David thanking him for his loyalty. I attached documentation, my termination letter from Hale Dynamics, showing I'd been fired without cause. Emails proving I'd built the strategies Richard was now claiming I'd sabotaged. Testimonials from other clients about my integrity and professionalism. I didn't mention Richard's email directly. I simply provided the truth and trusted David to make his own conclusions. He terminated Hale Dynamics' remaining contract that same day. So did 2 other clients who'd received Richard's email. 2 months later, the industry newsletter I subscribed to featured a small article. Hale Dynamics files for bankruptcy. I read it 3 times. The company that had once dominated the market, that had fired me for being difficult, was shutting down. Richard's name disappeared from industry lists. His social media went silent. The empire he'd built on other people's work had finally crumbled completely. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone to gloat. I just sat quietly in my office, remembering how small I'd felt that day in the conference room, how certain I'd been that my career was over. I thought about all the nights I'd cried, doubting myself, wondering if Richard was right. I thought about the slow, painful process of rebuilding my confidence and my career from absolute zero. And I realized something important. Richard's downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was Clark & Co. It was the team I'd built, the clients who trusted me, the reputation I'd earned through honest work. His bankruptcy was just the final confirmation that his way of doing business, exploiting people, taking credit, ruling through fear, was never sustainable. Then came the final email. Addison, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. You were the backbone of Hale Dynamics, and I destroyed the company by forcing you out. If there's any way we could collaborate in the future, I'd be grateful for the opportunity. I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm asking anyway. Please. I read it twice, my emotions complicated. There was no satisfaction in his begging, no joy in his downfall. Just a strange, hollow sadness for what could have been if he'd simply treated people with respect. I thought about responding, thought about offering some small gesture, maybe a reference or a recommendation. But in the end, I deleted the email, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. Richard Hale had taught me that some people will take everything you give and still demand more. He'd shown me that loyalty can be weaponized, that kindness can be exploited. I'd learned those lessons at great cost. I wasn't about to forget them now. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt truly free. Free from anger. Free from the need for validation. Free from the shadow of a man who'd tried to define my worth. A year after my firing, Clark & Co. was featured in Forbes. Rising Star, how Addison Clark built a marketing empire from scratch. The article detailed my journey, my philosophy, my approach to client relationships. It mentioned Hale Dynamics briefly, noting that I'd moved on to build something better after an unfortunate departure. My story became a quiet legend in marketing circles. People reached out constantly, asking for advice, wanting to know how I'd done it. When they asked, I always said the same thing. I stopped letting someone else define my value. I stopped believing that I needed permission to be successful. I remembered who I was before anyone tried to tell me I was nobody. Clark & Co. grew to 15 employees. We moved to a larger office. I hired people who'd been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside by companies that didn't recognize their worth. We built a culture based on respect, recognition, and genuine collaboration. Everything Richard's company had never been. I made sure every employee knew their contributions mattered. I gave credit where it was due. I mentored without manipulation, led without ego, and the company thrived because of it. Success wasn't about destroying Richard. It was about building something so fundamentally different from his toxic approach that it couldn't help but succeed. At a networking event 18 months after my firing, I saw Richard across the room. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, not just physically but energetically. The charisma that had once filled every space felt muted, uncertain. Our eyes met briefly. For a moment, time seemed to stop. I saw something in his expression, regret, maybe, or recognition of what he'd lost. I nodded politely, a simple acknowledgement, and turned away. Not rudely, not dramatically. Just naturally, the way you might acknowledge any acquaintance before moving on to more important things. Because that's what Richard Hale had become. Not my nemesis, not my motivation, just someone I used to know, someone who'd once had power over my life but no longer mattered. I rejoined my team, laughing at someone's joke, planning our next campaign, living fully in the present I'd built for myself. Later, driving home through the city lights, I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the growth, the victory that came not from his destruction, but from my creation. Richard had told me I'd be nobody without his job. He was wrong. I was never nobody. I just needed to lose everything to realize that I'd always been enough. The sweetest revenge wasn't destroying him. It was realizing I didn't need to. I'd already won.